All right, hi everybody. We are back for another lesson, and this week we are on week 10 on the remote learning art page. You know you're here because you got the green banner. It says week 10. You're gonna see right here at the top, we have an exit ticket. So you can click right on here in Unified Classroom. This is gonna ask you a couple of questions based on the videos that we're seeing. So definitely take note. If you haven't already done it, please do it. On week 10, so we have our exit ticket. I have a couple of videos for you. I also have a bunch of resources and pictures that you might want to use in your project for this element. I also have some resources. These are the pages that we are going to look at, and also this was my note to you earlier when quarter two started. So we're going to get started today talking about texture. It is the one of the last elements of art that we're going to talk about. And you're going to see that by using the other elements together with texture, we can really do some cool things with art, okay? So pay attention here because he's going to use the word tactile. And I want you to try and guess in your mind what that might mean.
The element of texture. Texture is the tactile quality of a surface. Textures can be categorized by their method, function, and character. A texture's method refers to how it's created. This can be actual or implied. Actual textures have qualities that one could physically touch, like real fur or real scales. Implied textures are the illusion of a texture, as created through drawing techniques, or the virtual mapping of a texture using software. The function of a texture can also be important. Textures can be critical to identifying what an object is, and textures can offer a sense of spatial orientation. Lastly, the character of a texture spans the range of tactile descriptions. For example, rough or smooth, hard or soft, glossy or matte, and thousands of other tactile possibilities. These subtle visual cues provided by texture often help a work feel more interesting and more complete. And there you have it, the element of texture.
So you'll notice that in here we talked about texture. It is referring to how an object might feel. And so tactile also refers to touching and feeling. One of the important things that was mentioned in this video was the fact that there are many different types of textures, but the main ones that I hope you walk away with are the implied texture versus the actual texture. And our next video is going to show you a little bit more about how this is used in art.
We tend to think of art as something just to look at, but a lot of artists make their work to stimulate our other senses. Sculptors, textile and fabric artists, bookmakers, ceramicists, and artists working in many other forms think a lot about how to engage viewers' sense of touch. Even when their art is not meant to be touched, artists put a lot of thought and work into creating many different textures. Texture is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, color, form, value, and space. Texture is the look or feel of a surface. Just like form, texture can be real or implied. If you were to run your hand across this sculpture by Alberto Giacometti, you would feel the hardness of the bronze metal and the roughness of the form that Giacometti created. This is called actual texture. Implied textures are only visual, they can't be felt. For instance, if you could touch the canvas of this self-portrait by Chuck close, you wouldn't feel the varied textures of skin and hair. You would feel the smoothness of the oil paint. So these textures are implied because we can only see them. There are countless ways that artists create implied textures. How many different kinds of lines do you notice in this painting by Roy de Forest? You have the zigzag lines creating a woman's hair on the left, cross-hatching creating her skin, the blurred, smudged colors coming out of the dog's mouth and the man's mouth in the center. Those are just to name a few kinds of implied textures here. Textures can also be created through use of shapes. In this painting by Gustav Klimt, notice how he repeats shapes to create textures. You have the triangles and lines on the woman's dress on the left, the many spirals creating the tree in the center, and in the woman's dress on the right you have circles within circles, rectangles within squares, and all the scattered shapes throughout the piece create many different textures. Paintings and other typically two-dimensional art can have actual texture. Sometimes artists layer paint on the canvas so thick that it becomes three-dimensional. At that point, the paint is a sculptural element that can be manipulated and shaped. Some artists build up fabrics, textiles, jewelry, and many other objects on the canvas to create additional textures. Artists often feature the natural textures of the materials they use, or textures uniquely created and formed by hand. Whatever the approach, textures are an expressive tool artists use to reinforce their overall messages. The next time you're making a painting, drawing, collage, or sculpture, find a way to incorporate textures that say something relevant and important to you.
And so there you have it. Remember, we are on week 10. You can find that on the sidebar. And later, you will be able to find this video right here in the video lessons subpage. So just keep that in mind. We are going to take a journey to a couple of selected websites that I have here that you might want to use for this project. But I wanted to share with you a couple of pictures. While we're going through these, I want you to imagine and think to yourself, what would this feel like if I touched the subject in the picture? Maybe it would be harsh. Maybe it would be soft, wiry. What would the beak feel like if you were to touch one of these birds? Okay. How would this sloth's nose feel versus maybe his belly over here? How soft do you think this alpaca's fur is? And do you think that his nose and his mouth are a little bit softer? And what about this kitten? There are definitely different feelings. These whiskers have a different texture than the fur on their nose. The fur on their nose tends to be very, very short. And I don't know if you've ever gotten kitty cat kisses or taken a look at what a cat's tongue looks like, but it's totally, totally different from getting dog kisses. These are really great close-up images, tend to show texture very well, especially in animals. But there's also other textures. It's not necessarily about how it feels, but also how it looks, right? So we have this painting of water. It's very glossy. It looks kind of like it's definitely rippling water, but it's not like heavy seas. It's very calming, it's very beautiful, very high contrast here. Value is being used here to create that rippling effect. This shows the contrast with the white and the dots of white over in here. This definitely looks like rough seas. It looks like maybe the wind is blowing some of this and there's a little bit of spray. Imagine what that would feel like. And imagine what this would look like or even sound like. You have like this little droplet of water mid-splash. These are always really cool things. You have this high gloss, but because of the lines and the shapes, we know that this is water. And so we can imagine what that would feel like between our fingers. We have a cactus, so I'm sure you know what that feels like. I'm sure we have all touched a tree at one point, and we can see just by the contrast, the darkness of these shadows. This is a very ridged bark with deep spaces between the ridges. This is an interesting one. I'm sure we've all held a plate, a spoon, and a cup before, but pretty sure it didn't feel like this plate, cup, and spoon would feel. I can only shudder to think what it would feel like to eat off of that spoon with the fur. I'm sure we can imagine what a tiger must feel like with its soft fur and its stripes. This might look a little bit familiar from our last video. It's a very intense close-up of one of Van Gogh's paintings. He painted in a style that is called impasto. It's very, very thick paint. And these dark spaces that you see along here that I'm kind of showing with my mouse, some of it is black paint, but this area in here where my mouse is, and up here through the lighter green, those dark areas are actually shadows. That's how thick he applied his paint. It's almost like if you could imagine squirting out toothpaste on your canvas and then using a paintbrush or a palette knife to kind of create these swirls. I'm sure we've all seen a movie or a scene or a picture that shows the desert. This strikes me as being very dry and very rough. And then we have a whole bunch of samples of what could be clay or maybe some kind of a sculpture where we have, of course, these would be pointy, these would be rough. This looks like scales, but it would definitely feel a different way given the material that it's made out of. Especially this one looks like fur, but I'm sure if you felt it, it would actually feel like something else. So it implies fur, but it would feel like something else, I'm fairly certain. So those are some of the examples that have different types of textures that I've put on the page. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look into some of the resources you might use if you are doing the writing assignment for this project. So the first one that I have up is this website called spore.com. And just like I just showed you those little clay sculptures of implied texture, I thought these were really cool because it shows what you can achieve with pen and ink and the different types of texture that you can create. Some of it might look familiar, like fur, and maybe this looks a little bit like a close-up of some wood, but some of it doesn't. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't imply some kind of a texture, like here, here, and here. This has a great collection of the different types of texture. Again, close-ups are a really good source for this kind of stuff. This creates another kind of visual pun, right? Like this is the outline of an apple, but I've never seen a hairy apple in my life. But why not create one? Or this one where it's an apple shape, but it definitely looks like it's almost made out of some kind of weaving. In here we have our Chuck Close, we have Frida Kahlo, we have, you may have seen this from an earlier assignment, there's our hairy cup again. So there's a lot of good resources here when you're talking about the different types of textures that you can have. This is another website that shows more artwork and the different types of finishes, right? This has a very high gloss finish, so that tells me this must be made of metal. And then I know from my own experience what metal might feel like. These are sculptures that are, they're abstract, so we don't really know what they are, but they look like rocks and very big ones at that. I can tell by using the proportion and the scale of the trees behind here that these must be very big, they must be made of rock, and they must be rough to the touch. I have this smooth, this is it looks like a metal to me, right? I can tell by the way that the light reflects off of it that it seems to be made of metal. And I can imagine what that would feel like. I can imagine it being very, very heavy. Again, this almost looks like a rolled piece of twine with metal, okay? So this has a great collection of the different types of artworks that you can see in here. I really love these two of the horses. This one is made of driftwood or scrap wood, and this one down here is created out of like scrap metal. And you can imagine how those would feel to the touch. And it's also kind of cool because we know what a horse should probably feel like, just given, even if you've never touched a horse, you've touched animals with fur, and you would have an idea of what that would feel like. I'm going to show you another three-dimensional one. This is probably one of my favorite sculptors. His name is Bernini. I don't know if you like Greek mythology as much as I do, but I love it. And this is actually the Roman version of a Greek god. I want to tell you, it is called the Rape of Proserpina. Here's a little vocabulary for you, though. You can see right here in the Wikipedia, this does not actually mean sexual violence, although generally a woman's right to choose at this point and engage and you know, say yes to this was not, back in those days, not really taken into consideration. And you know, if a god asked you out on a date, you generally couldn't say no. So this is more the Rape of Proserpina. This is more of a translation from the Italian, and it comes from the word more like they're sharing the root of the word rapture. I'm sure you may have heard in the Bible and other, you know, coming end of the world scenarios where there's rapture and people are taken away. And so this is what this tends to mean. It means the seizure of this woman. And so the short story of this is that this is the Roman god Pluto. In Greek mythology, he is Hades. He is the god of the underworld. And this is Proserpina. And in Greek mythology, her name is Persephone. And so basically what happened is Pluto, or Hades, was out walking one day. He saw Proserpina, or Persephone, and he was like, wow, she's really good looking. I'm going to take her down to the underworld and make her my wife. That's kind of how it went in those days. And you can tell by the way that she's, you know, got her hand up against his face over here. She's really trying to push as far away from him as possible. I don't think she really wanted to go. The story is that he takes her down into the underworld, and I believe he feeds her a pomegranate. And the eating of that pomegranate makes it so that she cannot leave the underworld. It's like one of those technicalities. And so when her mother, who was, I believe, a nymph, appealed to Zeus and said, please let my daughter come back to Earth, they had to make kind of a bargain. And so their deal was that for 6 months of the year, Proserpina, or Persephone, could come and live with her mother on Earth. And the other 6 months of the year, she would return to the underworld. And that is one of the origin myths for why we might have the seasons. That said, though, I really want to take a look at the texture, the implied texture of this. This is a marble sculpture. Marble is a very hard stone. It's also very hard to work with. And I want to take a quick look. We're going to zoom in on this, but I want to show you a view that you can't really see. It's this place right here where his hand is on her thigh. It's amazing what this man has created. The impression of his hand. This looks like a hand squeezing a leg, a piece of flesh. The way that it just sinks in, and it has this smooth roundness. It's quite a feat to have accomplished here. The detail here in his fingernails, you almost think that if you touched it, it would feel like flesh, but it's not. It's marble, it's rock, it's very hard. It would be cold to the touch. And it's just pretty impressive. We're going to take a closer look in just a moment at the implied texture. I'm going to zoom in over here at his in his beard so that we can see the way that the stone was carved in such a way to show the curls of his beard. And you can even see, as I scroll upwards, you can see there are actual grooves in here to help that. They are in harmony to look like strands of hair. You can see this better in his mustache. You can see little grooves of hair where his eyebrows are. You can see the crown Another really cool thing, we'll move, look at the musculature of his arms and his legs, his hip over here. It is really quite intense. The drapery here, look at the subtle folds in the fabric. I mean, it's really something. There is quite a bit of implied texture in this sculpture. And I really, if you like this one, I would definitely check out the rest of Bernini's work. It's very impressive. We looked earlier at a Van Gogh painting, and we took in, it was the Wheat Field with Crows, I believe. And that's a really cool example of how it's both a painting and it has a little bit of this texture included in it. This is on the Google Arts and Culture page. I really love this because look, I'm only halfway through zoomed in to how close I can get. We're going to take a look at the moon here. And you can actually see the paint is so thickly applied. Look at how close I can get in here. It's so thick that it actually cracked. Okay, that's pretty cool. And this isn't even the thickest that that Van Gogh has applied his paint. You can see in here some of these darker and lighter areas. It's not like white and blue mixed with the paint. It's literally shadows. I think that's really cool. Like you can see just like this little glob of paint here, this glob up here casts a shadow. You can also see some of the canvas behind. Some of it, he actually put it in quite thin. You can see a little bit of the texture of the canvas showing through here, as well as throughout the rest of the canvas. If you're really looking, you can see it shows through here. It's really cool to zoom in on Van Gogh's work because we're so used to seeing his work like this that we don't really appreciate just how thick his paintings are. As a little bit of a side note, there are definitely ways that you can add to your paint. Some things that you can do is you can add dirt, you can add flour, you can add glue to your paint. You can put glue onto your work and let it dry like Elmer's glue, and you can color over that, or you can paint over that, and that will also add texture to your work. There's so many things that you can do, and so many things that many different artists have done. We'd be here all day if I told you every single one of them. I've even seen artists break up eggshells, glue it down on a painting, and then paint over that. It's just really wild what some people think to do. Our next example of implied texture comes from the Arnolfini portrait. This is by a Dutch painter, Jan van Eyck. And I really love this one because it's just so cool. The amount of detail that this man went into is like insane. This was, side note, this was actually a marriage contract between these two people. It was used to kind of show that these two people were getting married. You can see that the name is in there. And we're going to zoom into a few different things. We'll take a look over here. We have some implied texture here. I'm going to zoom in on the lady because there's a really good example of two different types of implied texture here. So we have the folds of her gown. He is using value. There are deeper shades of green rather, and lighter shades of green to kind of show that it is folded, and that I can almost just see how it's just rippled and folded the way that she's grabbing it here. I can also tell that right over here, she's got this fur lining to her sleeve. And this is very soft. There are not the hard lines that you can see here and the sharp contrast. They're not here on this fur, which gives it another implied texture. It seems like it would be very soft to the touch, very soft, subtle lines here. And then you can take a look at the texture of her veil. It looks to me to be some kind of a lace, the way it frills over here and curves and bends. Seems like it might be a little bit firm at the end. And here's my favorite detail of this painting. It's this mirror back here. If you can see my little guide over here, this is just how small this is compared to the rest of the painting. But yet look at the detail, all right? We're seeing the backs of our couple here, right? So we see our green lady here and her back is here, and our man with the really weird big hat is here. You can also see where we are in the painting. This is us, we're the witnesses to this wedding. You can also see, if I were to touch this painting, obviously, number one, I'd get in trouble with whatever museum this is in. They would be like, "Miss, you gotta go. You can't touch this stuff." But a really cool thing is that you know, if I were able to touch it, it would be flat. I would just feel canvas or underneath it. I would not feel the roughness of this like brush, this like dust buster brush thing. But if I'm looking at the lines and the way the implied lines here, if I'm remembering our perspective lessons and the way that these are all kind of curving, especially here in the window, it gives me the impression that this mirror is not a flat surface. It actually tells me that this mirror is almost like a funhouse mirror, where it must be concave. It must be bowed either in or out to give it that kind of fishbowl look. And so I just really, really love this, this little small detail. So those are some looks of implied texture. Here's another way that you can use texture. There is, you may have done leaf rubbing, or maybe you've even gone and done grave rubbings. What this basically involves is going into a cemetery, taking a piece of paper, usually thin paper like newspaper or newsprint works really well. You kind of just hold your paper up to the gravestone. Let's see if we can find one on here. This person has this. I wouldn't recommend really taping to a gravestone. You never know what that might do if it's an older gravestone. This is something that some people like to do when they have a relative who's passed away. You can go and, you know, put your newsprint on that paper. And then what you do is you hold your, it's usually chalk, charcoal, crayons will work for this. Pencils sometimes work as well. And you just hold it sideways and you rub back and forth. And so you can get an impression of what's written and carved into the tombstone. You can see that here in this video, in this screen cap, and in all of these. Here's another one where you can see that where it ended and what was written on there. And you can get fancy with this. You can use different colors. You can kind of change the way it's angled on the paper. You can add multiple ones, overlap them by using different colors. It's really cool, but you don't really have to end there. You could take anything, you know, it doesn't have to just be graves. It could be leaves, it could be coins, it could be anything that's like flat enough that you could put your paper over and kind of get an idea of what that is. Artists, as I've said before, artists use so many different means of creating texture. We had in our last video, they talked about collage. You could take items around your house. You could take newsprint, you could take fabric. I'm sure we've all had a project where we've thrown a little bit of glitter on there too. Some people have, you saw from this video, they added rhinestones or gems. You know, I talked about adding eggshells. You could even do work where you use paint, where you put a lot of paint down and then you scrunch up a plastic bag while the paint is still wet. Those are all different ways that we can show implied texture, or even just add things to our artwork to create texture. So I hope you found this informative, and I hope that you can use this whether or not you choose to do the art piece or the written piece.